How you doing, man?
Good. I'm good. I'm home, so I should have actual Wi-Fi
Oh,
here.
cool.
So we shouldn't be skipping in and out like we did last time, which is good.
Nice. Cool. I'm just making sure I got storage on my computer and everything. I'm touching. Okay, cool. Sweet. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on again, man. I've really been looking forward to it. I'm gonna try to I'm trying to do better on the introductions on these. Shit. I'm in my son's room, so it's like I'm on his desk. I have like all these 3D toys we printed and shit everywhere. So
That's what-
yeah, so like I said, I'm trying to do better at introducing people. So this is Kyle Dobbs, who I would say is definitely one of the top trainers that you can find any good information off. I just posted a thing with you and Alec Blennis and a couple other guys that I think have the best Instagrams, and you just put out such good information. And we had such a good podcast the first time, so much good information. I think people will receive, especially like trainers. But we just had some technical issues, so I had to redo it. So thank you so much for coming on again, Kyle.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, I'm in a better place right now with better Wi-Fi, so we should be good to go.
Yeah, this is awesome, and they can look at you all pretty now. It won't be cutting out. So just last time we linked up, and I do have this available. I kept it open for members because like I just lost you a couple times. Then I actually ended up losing the video, so I just kind of put I put a lot of your Instagram stuff over, so it's kind of like looping. But the first time we went over a lot of your background. A lot of really good stuff. So we're gonna touch on a lot of it, but some of it we won't. So if you guys want to know a little bit more about how Kyle like got started in the industry, definitely check out that. It's available for members. But what I wanted to do, if you're cool, is just kind of go over a little bit of like your history in terms of like how you ended up forming your movement model, kind of like what we talked about a little bit last time, maybe some of the like certifications or courses you've done, and then how like Dr. Pat influenced you as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, kind of what we touched on last time. I'm the classic example of an injured collegiate athlete that, kind of fell in love with training and biomechanics through the rehab process way back in the day, 20 plus years ago at this point. And, that was kind of my first introduction, up until that point, up until really college, I was an athlete first and just kind of functioned and played sports and did the things I didn't really think about much. This was gosh, late 90s training. So there wasn't, our high school weight coach was basically just like, yeah, like go in and like do some stuff, and there was no coordination to it. There's a very loose plan. And even when I got into college in the early 2000s, it was basically like starting strength with power cleans, right?
Yep.
Like
And
that's
and this was basketball or football? You're
yeah, track and basketball.
track
So I
and
ran the
basketball.
100 and then I played basketball. And we did the same thing the football players did, who did the same thing the baseball players did. It was like everybody was on the same program. Nothing was specific at all, which was fine. I mean, there's qualities you want to train. It doesn't have to all be, necessarily specific to sport or anything like that. But we just kind of went along with it. And like I said, didn't really think about it. Just this is on the sheet, we're gonna go do it. And once I kind of had my first series of injuries in college, and I ended up with two almost back to back, and about 13 months of rehab between the two of them, out of 15 months.
What was the injury again? Achilles
So
or
I tore my hip labrum first, and
how did
then
that happen?
it comes down to overtraining. So I was a 400 runner, and I'm 6'4". So coming out of the blocks in my first 100 series was always my slowest. So I would kind of hyper focus and work on coming out of the blocks, and essentially I cramped working on starts after a hard practice and came down and stepped funny and just kind of sheared it, and I think a lot of it had to do with just, a lot of fatigue. And, back then, none of us were wearing catapults or anything like that. We were just, training. I probably had something crazy like 15 300s or something that day. And, just something stupid, and it's just like I wanted to always kind of work on that first 100 split because that was always my slowest. My acceleration wasn't as fast as, the 5'9" and 5'10" guys that I was working against because I had more legs to move, but I could carry through in the last 300. So I always kind of wanted to pick apart my ability to come out of the blocks faster and work through that first split faster. And so ended up with that, and then kind of came back for basketball and landed on somebody's foot in practice, and essentially my patella ended up kind of behind my knee. I had a full
The same side?
yeah, so it rotated all the way around. So it was a full subluxation. of the patella. I ended up with a partial patella tendon tear, um, two lateral and medial meniscus tears, and a MCL and PCL tear. So pretty much everything but my ACL. So my
Yeah.
ACL are actually apparently super robust. That's the only thing I have
Yeah.
on my
And,
career. But
and this is all pre like CSCS and any experience
oh
just
yeah,
just as a
this
college
was just
athlete. Okay.
yeah, I was 20 years old, and so I went through and kind of rehabbed that. And as we went through the process, we had a really good kind of ATC team, and we had a good, kind of physical therapist on staff. And I started getting more and more interested in it. And I was already a pre-med major, so as a biology, chemistry, double major with a physical science minor. And I was planning on going into orthopedics. I'd always had an interest in that. My dad had three knee replacements over the course of, his 50s and
Yes.
up. So I got to see that also kind of firsthand as well. So I always had an interest in that, and that's kind of the direction I felt I wanted to go in going into school. And this kind of changed my outlook on a lot of the stuff as I kind of learned more and more about the human body and more about training, honestly, in a more specific manner, and started really looking at kind of looking at, I don't want to say injury prevention, but just the concept of injury more proactively,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And just trying to build something that's a little bit more robust, right? So my
Well,
between
real quick, what you're talking about, like injury prevention, like I think that's totally okay to say. People have this weird connotation with it because
yeah,
you can do that a lot of manners, right? And we'll get into your
yeah.
programming a little bit, but yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
In a more intelligent way to go about the process, right? And not be just kind of blindly going through what we were going through. And that was something where, I between my about midway through my junior year, actually, I decided, I didn't want to go into med school. I still carried on and kind of graduated with my majors. I'd also transferred schools at that point post injury.
So you weren't playing anymore?
Yeah, so I ended up playing basketball. It was a lower level school, so a D3 school in the same city.
So you still
Uh,
paid for, it, right? You didn't have to pay for
yeah,
nothing? Okay, there
no,
we go.
no loans, which is always a good thing. So I ended up, well, I also got a full academic to that school. So track was done, still played basketball.
Was
Never,
your basketball affected much by it or not so much?
it honestly, my collegiate story had probably more to do with off the court issues where, during my injuries, I ended up kind of getting into a lot of pain pills, out of school stuff, a lot of partying and things of that nature where I played, but I didn't fulfill any type of potential. I
Yeah.
was there to do the thing and carry it out at that point. And um yeah, so that's a whole different story altogether. But
Well,
I
at
finished.
least your potential was like high, but not one of these people who has the kind of potential to like, change the world with their
Oh,
athleticism. That's
oh no,
that's the
I
saddest
didn't.
case.
I definitely didn't ruin anything. I wasn't shattering any dreams or anything. But yeah, ended up graduating and pretty much figuring out that I wanted to go into training of some kind, whether that was on the athletic development spectrum. That's kind of what I was envisioning, just being an athlete myself. So the program that I was in kind of ended with a CSCS at the end of the day. I basically switched from what was a pre-med into a modified exercise science. So I ended up getting a lot of extra classes on top of my curriculum. Still graduated with the same double major and minor, but I had a CSCS tacked onto it. So I took the test straight out of school, got that, and then promptly before I could really even start looking at internships or anything like that, my then girlfriend, now wife, we moved to New York pretty much right out of school. She was in a fashion program and got a job right out of school in New York. And
Is that common or is that pretty rare?
she interned up there for 3 years and made a lot of good connections and got a job offer straight out of school.
Because
So we
a lot of times you hear those degrees and you're like, come on, you're gonna do some of that. That's pretty cool. She legit right away had something lined
it
up in New
was,
York.
yeah, it was cool. Like we moved right out there, just took the leap. I
So
started
she
working.
was like financially responsible in the beginning
Yeah, I mean, for a little bit. We found out
for a short
that
bit.
we found out that what we were planning on making was not enough for New York. It was a
Okay.
whole lot of hard work. So I started working in a box gym. I was working at Crunch Fitness in Union Square and really didn't know what to do. I'd never been in a Gen Pop setting. Like I'd only, trained as an athlete. And I found out pretty quickly, like 40 times and three, three cone drills and vertical, like it's kind of the assessments and the things that I cared about, the things that I thought were important, were not necessarily applicable at all to the people that were in front of me. So I went through at that point, and to date myself, got my FMS 1 and 2 almost immediately. Got my NASM CPT on top of that. Also ended up with the NSCA CPT on top of the CSCS because it was more applicable. And started learning more about just general fitness, and kind of what gets people moving, and how we can improve just daily lives of people. And that was super eye-opening for me. I'd never really taken the time to think about, where most people are from a movement, fitness, and health perspective outside of like myself. I was 23 years old, and kind of I almost felt isolated, from a lot of like the general population. Like when we lifted with the girls volleyball team and the football team. Like I never saw like normal people working out, right? Like it just was the way it was. So going into a standard gym, which I'd never really worked out with, and up until that point, was super eye-opening to me. And honestly, like I fell in love with it. In the first 6 months there, I ended up getting into like national level like sales records. My first year there, total 12 months, I was in the top 5 trainers in the company nationwide, and kind of stayed there for the next 6 or 7 years.
So real
Uh,
quick, because we do get a lot of trainers that watch, and I when we did the last podcast, I realized how similar our stories are. We have a lot in common, and so I'm just curious, like, what do you think it was about you, about your approach that enabled that? Were you just the master salesman? I'm sure it's not like you're not like a car salesman and just able to sling so well. So, like, what enabled you to have that success early on?
I think a big part of it was I honestly, like, I got there at 5 o'clock in the morning and I left at 10 o'clock at night. Sarah, my wife, was at that point. She was working 60-hour weeks, sometimes more. And I learned really quickly that, I was watching kind of the trainers who were successful within that space. This pre-social media, there was nothing out there to tell you how to become a successful trainer outside of being like, hey, these 3 people are training 160 to 200 sessions a month at a high rate in the same gym with the same population that I am. I'm going to watch everything they do. I'm going to learn as much as I can from them. So in a way, like those were my first mentors. And I followed them around. I did what they did. I talked to the people they talked to. I worked the hours they worked. And I started picking up clients, and honestly, like I'm I'm absolutely not a master salesman in any way, but I do think I was relatable to a lot of the people that I was working with. And I think just being able to quickly take them through assessments, kind of talk about the things that can be improved upon. One of the things that I am happy about is I was never really a fear monger, out of those things, which is easy to see people kind of fall into from a trainer perspective. The overhead model, the overhead squat model, and the table testing, and the FMS series, and talking about just all the terrible things can happen if we don't get these scores, or we don't get these measurements, or whatever. It was more so just saying like, hey, this is what you're coming to me with. This is what you are telling me you're feeling. This is where you say you are as opposed to where you want to be. These are the biggest areas of opportunity we have to get you there. And being able to show people pretty quick results, was something that got me into a lot of like longer term and just very consistent clients. And I got to where I was doing 160 sessions a month, in my first 6 months. And then from that point on, I was 180 to 220 in
Yeah, I
12.
remember those days. That's fucking hard, right, man?
That's a grind, man. And
Like
that's,
mentally, right? Just the amount of
oh,
personalities, even though they're like good people, just that's a lot of mental. You come back, you don't even want to talk to your wife, you know?
oh, yeah, I used to tell everybody, it's like that's the most exhausting part, right? It's just like being on and being able to hold conversations with 8 to 10 different people a day, and actually remember what's going on in their lives. Because it's, again, you're talking about their kids, you're talking about their
Yeah.
vacations, you're talking about their work, whatever, their hobbies, the things they're interested in, and that's something that I think a lot of, as a completely different side tangent, a lot of young coaches don't understand getting into this is I was not talking biomechanics and training theory with them. It's like I would talk to them at the level that they were interested. So if they asked me about it, I would explain it. If they wanted more details, I'd give them more details. I never over explained anything. Once I kind of really got into it, a lot of it was just talking about what they were interested in, keeping them on track, keeping them on pace for what we were doing. And that is mentally exhausting, physically exhausting. You try to train on top of that. We were in Brooklyn, so I was getting up at 3:30 to catch the 4:15 train into Manhattan for my 5 o'clock clients. I'd get there at 4:45. So if you've ever been in Manhattan before 6 a.m., trains run quarter after quarter till. There's nothing in between. They only run two trains an hour. So it's like I was getting up early, getting to the train around 4:10, getting on the train 4:15, getting into the city 4:35, 4:40, and then waiting outside until somebody let me in, before my 5 o'clock. And that was just like that's a grind. I've got this funny story. I used to tell trainers like I woke up in the middle of the night once and I thought my alarm went off. It was somebody actually texting me, and kind of went through the entire routine of getting ready, getting out the door, and finally looked at my phone and it was like 1:30. I was just like, oh man. And like I
Dude,
went back and like slept on the couch for 2 hours. It
your
was just
your
brutal.
dream, dude. What happened to me before? I had the same fucking thing. There was a long time when I was 5 to 9, and I would have like 2.5 hours off during the day. And this is the craziest shit. I remember I literally, I swear I had a whole fucking day, and I was exhausted. And I get home, and I'm ready to go to bed, and then I open my eyes, and it was a fucking dream. I dreamed the day that was about to come, and I was just like, oh no, that didn't happen. I got to do this. I
You,
fucking
dude, you're delirious by the end of
yeah.
it. And I don't think people understand because it was like I work Saturdays, I work
Yep.
Sundays, but early on, it's like I did everything I could to make the money we needed just to pay to be there, just to be there. It's like my wife's first job, like it was 30,000 a year, which is not enough to do anything with
You'll see
in
someone
New
walking
York.
down the street in Manhattan with a purse, double that. You know?
Yeah, and it's just like our first apartment, and this was 2003. Like the rent for our first apartment was just a fifth story walk up, 400 square foot, one bedroom was $1,700 a month,
What do you think
and
that
that
is
was
now? I wonder what it is over there.
actually I looked at it not that long ago because we were just curious. It's like 4 grand, dude.
It's so crazy.
It's the same pictures. Like it
They
hasn't
didn't
been
update it at all.
like, dude, the bathroom was so small. Like, I couldn't even shower in our bathroom. The shower was so small and the shower head was so low. So I showered exclusively at the gym. Like, we have so many stories from our first couple of years there before we got into a place where had a comfortable apartment. But it's like you look back and it was also, it was so fun. Like, we were just kids. I was 24 and she was 23, and we were just like finding a way to do it. And
Yeah.
it was awesome to kind of go through, and I think it's something that coaches should go through. It's like I think everybody in this industry needs to go through like that 2 or 3 year period where again you shouldn't be grinding your entire career, but where you actually have to start and build a business. Like I was doing, we used to call them kickoffs, right? But they were consultations, like they were training assessments, consultations. I would not turn one down.
Yeah.
I would volunteer they were unpaid. I volunteered for every single one of them. I was doing them at 10 p.m., 5 a.m. It did not matter. I would do them. And like my manager eventually realized that. And I got more and more of them. I closed more and more of them. And then I started getting a ton of referrals from the people that I was closing. And, it's just, I think that's the biggest thing is I would watch coaches like turn down opportunities. And
Yeah.
it's like, I'm too
Trainers
broke.
can be so fucking lazy. They
Yeah, I
really
was like,
can.
I got $36 in my checking account.
Exactly.
Like I am not turning down anything, right? Like I can barely afford a Metro card to go home, right? So it's just like we went through this period where it was just like, I mean, we clawed for everything we had. And I think that level of desperation, even looking back on it now, like that ingrained a lot of probably the things that, even make me successful today. And
Oh,
being able to look at that and have that is just looking at that experience and just having that as like just perspective, on everything that I've kind of gone through and where I'm at now, I think is huge for me. And that's something that I think all trainers in this industry, like I said, need to go through is like go work in a public gym, build your business. If you want to go private in a couple of years and you're able to, fantastic. If you want to go remote and online and be able to do those things, do that, but train some real people in person first because I think I talk a lot online about optimal versus realistic, right? And it's Instagram is a theoretical environment. right? When you look at the majority of the posts that you see it, and again, really good posts, people that I love like their content, I'll see it and I'm just like, that's amazing. That's an amazing concept. That wouldn't have worked with 95% of the people I ever trained. And again, not just with the people, but the environments I was in, right? Again, like a lot of these drills that we learned that are so nuanced and so contextual. Okay, do that at Equinox Flatiron at 7 p.m. when there's 500
Exactly.
people on the training floor. Like it's not happening, so it's like you have to be able to improvise these things. And it's the same thing with programming theory, right? Like you can write the best program ever. And it's like, okay, you get into a real gym, it's like nothing's available. 7 a.m., 7 p.m., it doesn't matter. You're in a crowded gym. Like the equipment that you want to use most of the time, maybe 50% of the time at the very least, isn't available, and you have to improvise. You have to find ways to keep people moving because they only have an hour and you have to make the most of that hour, right? And you have to be able to change directions and critically think and problem solve. And I think that's something where, when we're looking at social media, a lot of it is very algorithmic where it's like, okay, if you see this, then you do this. And it's a pathway, it's a stepway. And it's like, okay, but things are going to happen, right? We're working in dynamic environments. It's not just you and a client in a vacuum, right? We got variables all over, right? And one of the things that we teach in our course is like we look at ecological dynamics and we look at dynamic systems theory. And it's like you have to be able to look at how other variables interact with one another, the reactions of those things, and how you're going to then react based off of those outcomes. And you can't just say, okay, we're gonna if this, then that, because that just doesn't happen. If it does, count yourself lucky and just keep on with it. But you always have to have a backup plan to the backup plan. You always have to be able to course correct. You always have to be able to change directions. Your clients are going to come in late. They're going to miss sessions. They're going to have to leave early. It's just what it is. And I think those are things where we look at all of this extremely nuanced, biomechanics and programming theory and even barometrics, right? It's just like we're looking at, okay, like this stuff's all great. It's true, right, for the most part, but something being true and something being useful aren't always the same thing.
How actionable, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we have to be able to actually do something with this information. And that's not saying the information is not good to have, but if you don't actually have something that you can do with it, it can sometimes just become noise.
This is
And
this is this is a quote you had from the last time that goes along. You had some really good quotes. I wrote a couple. One of them was like, "Something can be good. It doesn't mean it's right."
yeah,
In that
exactly.
moment,
Yes. 100%, 100%, man. And it's just so yeah, I mean it's as I got into training all the people and building my business, we kind of talked about this last time. I found more and more certifications, more and more, acronyms. And, back then again, same thing. There were no online courses that, there was people weren't going from city to city and teaching, rethinking the big pattern, 50 markets in 50 weeks, right? There are no Pat Davidsons running around teaching these things every single week. So we would go to like there's the Perform Better. It
Yep.
was in Providence, and it was once a year, and we would send like 20 trainers there, and we'd learn as much as we could in one weekend and come back. And every now and then you would catch like an FMS or, eventually kind of FRC and DNS started coming into the picture as well. And especially in New York, we were fortunate that a lot of
Yeah.
people were coming there, right? And so we didn't have to travel too much. And what I always try to explain to trainers is like, man, if you went to a 3-day seminar on a weekend, like you have to account that you had to pay for it. You probably had to pay for travel. And then you were missing sessions, right? So you were losing money on top of it as well. Like sometimes these like $500 to $600, certifications or whatever seminars, they would cost you $1,500, right? It was a big investment, especially as a young coach that wasn't necessarily making a lot of money early on. So it's definitely something that you really had to commit to, and you couldn't do it every single week. You couldn't do a new online course every single month, right? So
Like
it's
two or
like
three a year tops.
yeah, you had to kind of plan it out and look at like which one of these or which two of these had the most value based on the people that I'm actually working with. Not necessarily based on my own interests, but based on the people that I'm actually working with, which one of these will have the most value that will push my career further forward and help me help my clients more. And I think that's a good thing, right? Because you weren't just, as my son says, you weren't just spamming, seminars. You had to pick and choose. You had to be selective. And, I think as we got into that, like I said, did FRC, did some DNS stuff, and then got into, the basics of PRI. I was fortunate enough when I left Crunch, at that point, I was a regional manager. So I was overseeing uh, half of the New York market. I went to a private gym called Peak Performance, which at the time was looking to expand into like a super gym in New York and then expand into several more markets, Miami, Chicago, London, Dallas, LA, and really become more of a global type super gym. And it was going to be kind of the first of its kind. It was, I mean, it was the top two, it was the 22nd and 23rd floor, the penthouse floors of a building in New York on 6th and 14th, right off
Yeah.
Union here. It's like standing in the space, you could see three states.
Yeah.
It was so cool. Like it was a huge space, just a mega project, and it just fell through. The investor ended up pulling out about 80% through. There's a lot of things that happened during construction and a lot of shady things that kind of happened. But that's where I met Pat, right? That's where I met the guys at
He was a
Resilient.
part of that or what?
Yeah, he was the education director when I came in, and I came in to be the personal training director. So we worked hand in hand with the education and the staffing. Ethan Grossman was our internship coordinator, if you're familiar with him. Um, Doug Kajijian and the Resilient team were our in-house PTs. I mean, it was just a
Doug. Yeah.
phenomenal staff. Like the trainers that were on that staff, a lot of them are still very good friends of mine today. We still talk a lot, and it's the best staff of especially like a young group of personal trainers that I've ever seen assembled. Like just absolute superstars, some of the smartest people I've ever worked with, also just savages in training. Really kind of put it all together. And, for me, it's like walking in was a complete wake up call because they were all put together and then they brought me in later. And I walked in the first education meeting and Pat was speaking a different language. I was just like, whoa, like
Is this
this guy,
pre-bill or he's still just PRI or he'd already done bill stuff?
he it was I think this is pre-Bill. Like I think he knew Bill, but at this point he was actually instructing for PRI himself as well. So this would have been 2011 to 12, somewhere in there, maybe 2010 even. And I was just I realized really quickly like I was the dumbest person in the room and I was gonna
Not the dumbest, just ignorant. You didn't have
yeah,
the
yeah,
knowledge.
just like I wasn't exposed to this, right? And I was just like, man, like I need to learn this stuff as quickly as possible.
It's kind of crazy. I don't mean to interrupt you, right? But it's kind of crazy because you had already accomplished so much as a trainer, and then I felt the same way. Where I was like, holy shit, like, goddamn.
And you move to a different pond and you're like, oh, dang, like this is wild. This is and for me especially, at that point I was in prime just curiosity. And that put a lot of things together for me for like a
Like
bio
fills
just
in the holes, right? Shit that you saw, but you couldn't necessarily like explain
yeah.
away. Yeah.
It kind of it connected a lot of dots because again, a lot of these other systems you see similarities, right? Like you're seeing a lot of the same contraindications, a lot of the same patterning. They're just everybody's calling it different things, right? And for me, it was like that kind of connected a lot of dots for me where I was like, okay, like I can look at this and see some of the things that I saw in anatomy trains and connect that to some of the patterning I saw in FRC and even FMS, right? And whether you call it chains or whether you call it mechanics or whatever, right? You can kind of see just movement, right? And I'm starting to see some of these pictures and PRI kind of laid that out for me in a way that I was like, okay, this makes the most sense and kind of encapsulates most of the good things and most of the similarities that I was seeing in the others and kind of throws out some of the maybe the outliers and the things that weren't similar, the dissimilar aspects. And I essentially took the foundations in 2 months when I
All
is
three of them?
yeah.
That's a
Uh,
lot.
well, I had the advantage of
Yeah,
working
Pat.
with him every day,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
we
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just had Ben Yanez on last time, and I guess he was there right after you. I think after you had left, and he was saying the same thing. He said it was like supercharged going with Pat every day.
yeah he was there. I was quite a bit after, but. but yeah, it was interesting because we were just training. We'd train, we'd talk about things, and if I had questions about a concept, he's like, "Let's go out to the floor and take a look at it."
He's so
And it's like,
cool.
yeah, and it's like so we kind of went through the process where it was just like, yeah, for me, I'm always going to learn better by doing. I think most of us are just you get into this industry like you're a practical learner, right?
And
Like
especially with that shit, PRI, there's no other way.
you have to feel it. You have to go through the process. You have to go through the testing and kind of go through some of the actual, at that point, the strategies and the actual applications. And for me, he did a really good job as well of helping me understand how to take those concepts off of a table and onto a training floor. And this was rethinking the big patterns. I think that was an idea
Yeah,
kind of in his head at that point. We were going through at that point like Mass One and Mass Two as well. So we got to all beta test
gotcha.
like those products and being like the first testing groups for both of those, which was super fun. And again, met a lot of other good people. So I met Ben House and a bunch of other people kind of throughout the process. And it was just after about 18 months that kind of blew up. I went to another company where I was a national director, overseeing 17 to 18 markets over a 2-year span, and about 3,000 trainers, and kind of worked with them on building a model, building just profitability margins, building out, kind of like what staffing and hiring procedures were actually going to be in place for the facilities they were looking at. It was all corporate and residential. So they would put in literally some of the nicest facilities you've ever seen, like that were just like in a hedge fund building or in like a high-end luxury apartment in New York, right? Like we had one that was, I forgot even what the business was, but it was 5,000 square feet. It had Kaiser everything. It had Sorinex racks. It had, 10 Woodway treadmills and 5 Jacob's ladders and all the rowers and skiers. You're just looking at this and you're like, this is gonna get used by like 8 people a day, right? And it's like it's the nicest facility I've
Are
ever
you
been
are
in.
you giving your input at this point about that at all? You're like, hey, I
Oh
don't
yeah,
know.
we're helping design it and build it out, and they'd give us, that was actually one of the more fun things because it's like they were just like, hey, we've got this space, we're building it out, and we have $750,000 for equipment
Isn't that the
budgeted.
coolest feeling?
And it
Like
was
I
like,
built my gym out with no budget, just anything I
yeah,
want for 2,000 square feet. I did like $700,000. It's
yeah,
like
just like I'm just it's got a checkbook. We're just going through stuff, and it was super fun.
they were
Uh,
profitable and good, or things went bad with them too.
no, they were good. We got to a point where, I was super burnt out. My kids were really small. We'd moved to New
I'm
Jersey.
sorry to interrupt you again, but any training at that point, or it's all like corporate stuff?
Oh, that was all corporate stuff. I wasn't training any clients. I was overseeing a huge staffing base and about 60 facilities nationwide, maybe a little more at that point. And really just working on kind of like the theory of the business. It is way more leadership and education at that point. Wasn't training clients at all, strictly just upper level. And we'd moved to New Jersey into the suburbs at that point. I was commuting in before my kids woke up. I was getting home after they went to bed. I was seeing them maybe on the weekends for a day and a half and still having to answer emails and do payroll and do all these other things depending on the weekend. And I was just kind of done with it. So we'd also at that point I'd started going like Ben House was hosting a lot of educational seminars down in Costa Rica. He'd built out an entire complex down there. And I'd gone down and spoken at 2 or 3 of them. I'd attended 5, which those were a blast. Like we were about a half a mile from the beach and about a mile the other way into the rainforest and about 5 miles into the cloud forest. So we'd go to education all morning. We'd lift and then go to education, eat lunch, and then you could either go surf or you could go hike in the rainforest. Those were like or just hang out by the pool, right? And those were the options. We'd come back for dinner and then I'll just jack around after dinner and talk about fitness or whatever, and those were super fun. And but that kind of like, going there, I was just really like, man, I got to get out of New York. Like I'm a mess. Like I like physically, physiologically, like I look fine, but HRVs tanked. At one point I got tested, like my testosterone was like in the 200s.
Bet.
I was just like, I was just complete, I was a wreck, right? And kind of started building out a plan to, move back to the Midwest and kind of restart things, start my own business. That's where I started Compound Performance. I was originally going to open a gym here upon moving. Couldn't find a space I liked for the money I wanted, and that ended up being very fortuitous because COVID would have knocked me out 100%. In this market, I would not have made it, would not have survived, especially as a young business, because this was
Really,
right.
yeah, it's really good you listen to your intuition, like
Yeah,
because we want to like I understand that need like want to jump this spot opens. I was in a similar situation, so I think that's really good advice. Like unless it's especially for something like this where you're gonna be like
yeah,
it's not easy, so you got to make sure you're in the right spot. Yeah,
yeah.
that would have been fucking terrible.
This was like, yeah, 2017, 2018. Like
Yeah,
it would have just completely
it would
knocked
have
me
been
out.
like just enough for you to build it up, and then it would have
And
been fucking
then,
wiped
yeah,
out.
exactly. Just enough to owe a lot of money, basically, is what it would have turned into. So I started Compound Performance, which is completely remote, and built that up pretty quickly to the point where I was hiring employees about 6 months in. And that was all consulting and education. We did some remote coaching as well. And did that for 8 years did that for 7 years before my employee asked me, he's like, hey man, I'm moving out of Houston and I want to open a gym and I'm either going to do it in Tennessee where my parents live, or if you want to look for spaces in St. Louis, I'll move there. And the market here is kind of right for that. Real estate was down and we ended up getting a really good location in a former gym. So a lot of the meat and potatoes, the bones, so to speak, were in place. The locker rooms were in place. We weren't going to have to replumb the entire thing. Ended up having to do a lot of electrical and HVAC just because the building wasn't really taken care of very well. Ended up doing a lot of remodeling. So again, we invested money for sure, but not as much as maybe we would have had to in just an empty warehouse. And we opened that this past July, and we're cruising. We're 7 months in. We're ahead of schedule on a lot of the membership stuff and kind of making it work. And that's where we're at today. So right now it's Coalition is the gym. We're up and running with that. Compound Performance, I'm still running. I've downsized it a little bit. We just do 2 education intensives a year at this point, and then I've got 15 to 20 remote clients at any point that I still work with, and a couple mentorship education people I work with. But we've scaled that down to scale the gym up.
Yeah.
So now it's just, yeah, trying to manage that and still get my kids to soccer and basketball and swim practice in the evenings and, the games on the weekend and all that good stuff.
Yeah, you get to watch them all now.
I
It's
know.
that's when and we talked a little bit last time, but yeah, that's when I got my gym was we started in 21. We took it over from like a boxing fitness gym that just went under during COVID. So it was like the perfect situation because they owed a bunch of money and they wanted to get them out and they just let them out. We just took over, so it worked out good. So that would have been you if you had done it.
Yes, 100%.
Uh,
I would have been on the wrong end of that deal is what would happen.
yeah, exactly. So you meet Pat, you start doing a lot of PRI. You already done like DNS and FRC. Like for where you're at right now, like what do you how would you explain your movement model currently?
So it's probably more of a programming model. Like I'll attach biomechanics to adaptations, that I'll be programming for. So we do a lot of, so the other thing that we've been doing over the last few years is we got hooked up with Evan Pycon, and started talking a lot. And he works mainly in the conditioning world, but he works a lot of kind of substrate utilization based programming. So bioenergetics. And we kind of saw that and started working with him on finding ways to incorporate that into strength training so that we could look at kind of the same levels of stimulus and the same bioenergetic model over a full concurrent program, right? Looking at both the strength and the conditioning aspects. So the way that I do a lot of my programming is built around high, moderate, and low stims, vertical integration. So again, consolidation of stressors per day. Like I might have a high day, which is a lot of power velocity state focused. And same thing you would expect as far as like reps and sets, very low volume, really high intensity, whether that's velocity based or force based, depends on which way you want to, surf the force velocity curve. Sprinting, intensive plyometrics, hard ballistics, med balls, things like that. And with that, like especially when I start looking at movement, for me, I'm looking at mid to short range concentric focus, right? So a lot of the movement that I'm looking at there is, from a PRI perspective, it's like I'm driving compression,
Stiffness. Yeah, it's stiffness.
right?
Need it. Yeah.
Right. So it's like I have like something that would be classified as more of like a stiffness day, right? Where I'm trying to find ways to get people to leverage those positions for the most power output, right? So that's kind of like one type of day.
And
And then,
so,
oh,
sorry. So on those days, if I'm wrong, correct me. But it's like on those days, it's just output. You're not trying to fix mechanics on that. We're trying to get fucking output. Is
yeah,
that right? Okay.
yeah. If there's something that I think needs to be fixed, we're probably just not to that day yet,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
That type of training yet. So otherwise, if I've got somebody that, otherwise is, relatively competent, moves pretty well, yeah, we're just leveraging compression, we're leveraging stiffness, and we're leveraging power outputs. And I'm not worried about expansive qualities that much. There's really
Gait,
not, yeah, there's not an
propulsion.
eccentric focus really at all, from that perspective, right? So getting into like the moderate stim, that's where I'm driving more myofibril hypertrophy. And that's where we get into more mid to lengthened positions. We get into more eccentric tempos and eccentric stress, fuller ranges of motion, and things that are going to be more, for in a lot of ways, going to promote more expansion and full range of motion movements. So that's where we get into a lot of, you know, sub-maximal strength. So we'll say 70 to 80%, sometimes 65 to 80% 1 RM. We'll be looking at sets of, usually 6 to 8 total reps of 24 to 30 with main lifts. But
Any reps in reserve at all, or like one, or what do you usually do?
it depends on the phase and depends on where people are on the phase. So that might even be something that changes over the course where it's like early on, we're going to say 3 RIR, and then we're going to get into over the course of the phase, higher RPEs, lower RIR. And but that's where like your squat might go from where maybe in like that high stem phase, we were literally doing like a pin squat, like 3/4. Now we're getting into something that's like a heel elevated cambered or a front squat, where we're going through a full range of motion. We're trying to drive those lengthened positions. Propulsion is more of a focus, that type of thing, right? Same thing with presses, where we're going to do things that are going to be fuller ranges of motion. We might go from a barbell into dumbbells or even into like converging machines or cables that allow for fuller ranges of motion, more scapular movement. And that's where, again, from a conditioning perspective, more glycolytic outputs. So, again, more sub-maximal velocities. So, that's going to be a lot of our 30-second to 2-minute tempos or interval training. We'll still be doing intensives, but we might also, if you're familiar with plus plyos, we might also get more into like developmental plyos or deep tier plyos, where we're looking at SSCs or stretch shortening cycles within lengthened positions. So, we're looking more at like volume
Is
lunge.
that something you get from like McKinnis, or where do you get a lot of your plyo stuff?
I mean, I've done a lot of plyo programs. But I honestly, I love his, I think his is the most well-rounded. I
Yeah.
also get a lot of stuff and I've gotten a lot of stuff from like Lee Taft over the
Oh
years.
yeah, yeah.
I love his stuff as well. And then even from a conditioning perspective, and this kind of bleeds in, um, why am I, geez, I just lost the name. It'll come to me. I should have ate before this. I feel like I'm probably low on a little bit of brain glycogen as well right now. But yeah, I think his plyometric model is probably the most useful in a lot of ways. It's something that, I connected with him. I mean, he was on our podcast 6 years ago, and he was still relatively small and we connected kind of right away. I love what he does. Over the years, David Gray's another guy who I've gotten a lot of stuff from and talked to a lot over the years. And then Lee Taft, I think it just does a lot of very practical, very applicable things from a plyometric and just changes direction and kind of, uh, speed, aspect of things. So a lot of that model is kind of built of that. So like that's that day, that type of days where I'll use a lot of like kind of deep tier work, things that are going to be way more tissue based. And then from a connective tissue perspective, way more lengthened position um, based. And then we'll have low days that are going to be way more oxidative. We can throw in some sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, just very high volume based things. Again, learning how to buffer that lactate a little bit,
Like
become
15 plus, or when you say high volume?
I do a lot of density work,
Yeah.
honestly.
Like timed?
Um, yeah, timed
Yeah.
and a lot of oscillatory work. So if I do things that are like 15, 20 reps, a lot of it will be like one oscillatory with no lockout on extension or flexion. So it's just gonna be constant
Yeah.
movement,
Which
building.
I want to get into this a little bit later, but we talked about it last time, how that's really great for like a narrow,
Oh,
particularly.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. It's
Or
just
hypermobile. Yeah.
yeah, and they build up just that 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 like joint control and the level of joint control, I think is very good, just neurological for them because it kind of teaches them not to overextend and hyperextend, kind of throughout a lot of that process and learn how to control active ranges, which I think is going to be super, super big for them. And from a conditioning perspective, that's where we get into like more threshold based work, where I'll kind of get into like 70 to 75, maybe even upwards of 80% max heart rate if someone's really trained. Um, and then everything's kind of based off that, and I think that's where, from a movement perspective, it's not so much patterning, it's just looking like what ranges match up with the type of stimulus and adaptation I'm looking for. And I've started just kind of dividing things up that way, um, experimenting a lot just on myself through the process, but working with it with a lot of clients as well and been pretty successful with it. There's definitely phases where I still do something, more horizontal integration, especially if somebody has kind of a lower training availability or frequency. Like if somebody's in the accumulation phase and we've only got 3 days, that might be something where I do more of a horizontal integration where it does look more so like, hey, we've got kind of a power warm up is a ramp, and then we go into like myofibril work, and then we go into like lower level, like higher volume work, kind of all within the same day. So we do have a high, moderate, low in one training session, and we are a little bit more body part split or upper lower split or something like that, rather than like more of a full body model, which I might use. So again, it's all goal dependent. I definitely do things that are more classic, I guess, is the best way to kind of term it, if the time demands on it. But a lot of my athletes now are definitely more performance driven, and that vertical integration and consolidation of stressors seems to work better from a recovery
Yeah.
perspective.
So I was
A lot of
thinking.
them. It's just less stress per day, and you can kind of spread it out over the week a little easier. Because what we get into is like, especially from a recoverability perspective, you almost get a bell curve, or you do get a bell curve. I found where the high and the low are actually pretty recoverable because the volume is so low on the high and the intensity is so low on the low. The moderate stem work, where you get into the glycolytic conditioning, you get into the myofibril hypertrophy based work, that's where you have enough intensity paired with enough volume that those are actually kind of the hardest days and the hardest to recover from. So those are the ones where I really have to, for a lot of people, I really have to kind of manage and regulate like what they're able to do versus what they want to do. And you look at, like a classic Charlie Francis model, like high-low model. There's a reason he took out everything in the middle. And that's because it was way more fatiguing. And if I was working with Olympic level sprinters, most of the time doped up, I'd probably do the same thing. But I work with normal people who also need to like build more tissues. And those are the days where like we can leverage that stress for hypertrophy, for submaximal strength or submaximal repeatability, which is going to be important for them, as just field sport athletes or everyday Joes or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I think programming is pretty overrated in the sense the way most people do it, especially in terms of hypertrophy. But your approach I think is just so valuable and like different. Like obviously you have the concurrent method going on. I want to dive into this a little bit more because it's really interesting to me. So on your low stim day, you're getting the heart rate up to like 80%. You're going that high. I thought that was more of like a lower, like a
It's
kind of like
somebody.
a what do they have now? I was thinking more like zone zero type of shit, where it's like you're going like real low longevity stuff. So you'll still get some fucking work in there on those days.
Yeah, I mean, and that's if somebody's
Conditioned for it. Yeah.
yeah, if somebody's more of a newbie, like I said, I'm gonna go. And this is something I've talked with Alec Blennis about as well, where I actually categorize zone two as into two subcategories. So you've got threshold based, where you're more in that like 70 to 75% max heart rate. And for someone who's super trained, we can even get up into upwards of 80. And then you've got like your classic zone two. And that's where you're kind of in that like 60 to 65 to 70% max heart rate. And I think that's where, for me, from a what I'm training people, I might have a low oxidative day like once a week. I end up training, or programming more threshold work for a lot of my clients just because that's going to be more performative for them when they're in marathon prep, when they're getting ready for a triathlon, when they're getting ready for a high rocks. They're not going to be running at 60 to 65%. If they want to do that stuff kind of on their own or one day a week, just from a cardio adaptive standpoint, sure. But a lot of the people that I'm working with, they've already got that adaptation. Like the most benefit I can give them is making the harder stuff feel easier. So they end up with more threshold exposures than they do more of the classic zone two exposures. And that's where, yeah, like we have fun with that. Like those end up still being like pretty hard days, but they are more recoverable. They're more, again, it's like from a tissue perspective, it's even the lifting stuff, like we get into more sarcoplasmic work and it's more cell swelling. So it's just more pump work. It's less mechanical stress. You don't get a ton of DOMs out of it. It's a little shorter positioning and it's more oscillatory. So they get a lot of volume, but the actual tempo, that's where like I'm gonna throw in a lot of machines. If we don't have machines, we're gonna do a lot of static dynamic work with that two tempo or that 3-3 tempo.
That's really cool. There's so many different ways to look at it, depending on whatever your lens is, too, right? Because you have, like you said, you have the ATP, the glycolytic, and the oxidative energy systems. But also, you could, if you're just looking at it from like a bodybuilding or strength, you got like the neural adaptions, you got more of the myofibril, you got more of the
Yep.
sarcoplasmic, slower twitch stuff. And again, we can look at it through propulsive gait cycles and all that kind of stuff. So I really think that whatever your lens is, this could be something that you could really apply to it. So we talked about an example, which I think was a great example. I want to reuse it, about how when we're trying to improve someone's biomechanics, we need to take into account like necessarily what's causing them to break down, and then we can address that through these different kind of intensity levels that you program in there. So let's use the example we used last time because I think it's a great one. We talked about someone potentially missing some internal rotation. So say it's just, I mean, usually wides, they get so compressed it can be hard to express their internal rotation, and then a lot of times with the narrows, sometimes they're don't have the anchor to really do it, effectively. So I think everyone could always use some internal rotation. So let's say we have someone missing internal rotation. I'm not even going to frame it like where we see it, right? Because that kind of matters too. So let's see an internal rotation. I just want you to kind of give me your lens on how you would look at that and how you would kind of program for it through these different kind of intensity levels that you put through your program.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, there's a few considerations I would look at first, right? One, is it bilateral or is it symmetrical or is it asymmetrical, right? Like again, because that's going to show me basically like, are we dealing with somebody who's an AIC or are we dealing with somebody who's more of, a PEC or something of that nature, or just a classic bilateral compressive, right? And, when I'm looking at somebody's structure, again, usually when we're looking at a wide versus a narrow, we can make some assumptions. Not always, but we can kind of guess like where that might come just from a pure structural perspective, right? Like if I'm looking at someone who is more classically compressed and we're probably missing some internal rotation because essentially we're already closed that door, right? And everything goes out all the time because that's really the only way they can move. With those people, like that might be something where I'm actually going to force a little bit more external rotation just to get them to neutral so that I can drive more internal rotation through a range of motion. And that can be something where it's like as I go through squats, I might even band that person out a little bit and kind of get them to where they're actually pressing against something and take that band away so that we actually find a neutral point. So we might have a little bit of reciprocal inhibition there. From a unilateral perspective, that's someone that I'm probably going to put on like more of a front foot elevated type positioning where we can get deeper into just hip flexion and drive more of pelvic adduction and internal rotation there with the actual femur. Drive a little bit more IR, get a little bit more rotation, and have them learn how to twist out of it, kind of rotate out of it on the concentric. If I'm looking at somebody who is more narrow and it might be more of a strength deficit, or it might be someone who, again, is so externally rotated at the femurs that they lack where that IR is going to come just from a pure positional perspective. They can't find it or they're not strong enough to obtain it. that might be where it's like we're just going to drive strength training. We're going to teach them how to do it through machines, or we're going to get them more in like, that might be where I do more of an RFE situation with them, where we can drive a little bit more tension through the upper, through like mid-range to upper. And we might do more just bilateral training with that person just to build more foundational strength. I think there's a lot of ways to kind of look at it. It's interesting because I've found completely opposite approaches working with even different wides, through the years, because a lot of it is just like what sticks, or do we need to drive you into IR so you can find it, or do I need you to give you something to kind of push against to find it reciprocally? And a lot of it is figuring out like what sensation is actually going to get them to, basically get the light to turn on for them. Um, that's where, for me, understanding like, is it tolerance based? Is it capacity based? Is it actually mechanical? Right? Can I put them on a table and say, like, we can find a little bit of, and they've got, passive range of motion, but they don't have active range of motion once we stand them up? Or we get on a table and they're all locked up and we can't find it even passively. Like those are two different scenarios, for two different people. So it's interesting. It's even like hypothesizing it, I think is hard just because I've seen so many different things work for different people. And sometimes it is strength based, sometimes it is completely positional and finding like sensation and creating that space or creating that positional awareness for them. And other times it's like we give you something to push out against, and all of a sudden everything opens up and they can find it eccentrically. And that for me is like that's where I think the seminars and the Instagram and everything else kind of misleads people, where it's not always one solution, and I think that's kind of a hard reality for a lot of people. And it's like you have to have more potential options than just saying like, hey, we're going to do this one drill and then we're going to integrate it through this other drill. And then, maybe I'm going to add like a constraint at your feet and it's going to work. And it just doesn't always work, and it's like and if it doesn't, it's like you need to know like why, or have a better understanding of like what maybe you should do when it doesn't work. Um, so I don't know. I feel like that got probably too much of a tangent there, but
No, that's perfect. No,
yeah,
I think you touch on it exactly where we're trying to go, and what I think is super important, because coming from like a PRI background, like we kind of do, we can see people try to restore internal rotation. We're just going on with that by doing certain methods that would like probably wouldn't be the best for us to use with certain clients in certain situations, kind of like you were saying. So I assume if it's like a not a capacity issue, if it's just a space issue and there's just nothing there, I mean, at some point you got to regress and do the positional boring shit, I'm sure. But a lot of people, you don't have to necessarily meet them there. And like you said, if it is something that's happening more due to capacity, like are they like how soon is it, like super early, or are they like super fucking tired before it starts to get wonky? So let's think about. So I'm like we talked about your third height. Your what's the term you use for your different levels? Not intensity. Your you got the low, high, mid, stim. Yeah, your high stim,
yeah,
right? Yeah, yeah. So your high stim day, that's we're not trying to correct shit. I mean, you're like I said, if you need corrected shit, you're not in doing that for that day, right?
yeah, we're probably not there, right?
I
We're
mean, I'm sure
probably
you're making sure nothing's super wonky, but yeah,
yeah, like your high stim selections are going to be like med ball work, things
yeah,
like. But it's
yeah.
probably not going to be lifting
Yeah,
based.
well, that's a great thing though, because here I'm thinking, high stim's off the table, but you're right. You could do some medicine ball work, things that
Oh yeah,
still could build that capacity. Medium stim is where you talked about really kind of like driving it, which is important because you're driving training adaptions at the same time, So obviously we're fixing some issues, but if you're a bodybuilder, we're still getting hypertrophy, you're still building some muscle, and then
absolutely.
and so that would be kind of like you were talking about. Maybe we bias a front foot elevate split squat towards that, and we stay in that rep range that we would do for that. And then for the kind of the lower intensity ones, the low stim, I feel like that's kind of your opportunity to really like reintroduce some new like movement familiarity, because that's the high exposure. Is that kind of how you look at that?
Yeah, that's where like you can get more dynamic, right? For sure. And you can build more competency. And really like it can again, it's like I've got some people where their lower stem training days is purely machine based and purely like oscillatory sarcoplasmic, very density based. And then again, built based on goals and training environment, goal selection, selection, whatever. I've got others where it's like that's where we set up things that are going to be more dynamic, right? And that's where we get into multiplanar movement. That's where we get into
Kind of the
more.
FP stuff. That's where you start doing the twirlies.
Oh yeah, the full twirlies. Everybody's got those cables set up. So maybe not that dynamic all the time, but that's where we can actually start driving more dynamic work. Like that might even be somewhere where I can do even higher volume, lower level med ball stuff where I might put somebody against a wall in a split squat and we're just doing like a minute to 90-second block of just low level throws, catches, and rotation, right? And just building coordination, building rhythm, and building rotational qualities there with like a lower body stabilization. So there's definitely things where you can throw a lot of stuff or a lot of different stuff. Like low stim is also sometimes things where it's like we do LICT, right? So again, it's like we do a 5 minute to a 20-minute block of alternating step ups. And we can emphasize pelvic positioning and femoral positioning with that, right? Like I'm just going to pick a box height where you can actually raise and start internally rotated and extend into external rotation and then drop back down in internal rotation as we kind of go through that range of motion. And depending on the length of the block, you're going to get hundreds of reps in, right? So again, it's not so much are we building a ton of tissues? No, but are we building a lot of competency and coordination through that? Probably so, right? Same thing like with like I love to use sleds. Like I think sled pushes and sled drives are one of the best things again to teach from like again like a mid to late stance propulsive aspect. Like you want to be able to rotate out of a hip and put somebody on an overhead sled push and let them march out and
Yeah.
drive a little bit of force, right? And that's another thing where it's like we'll pick a light load, nothing that's crazy, occlusion based, but and give them 5 minutes to 20-minute blocks, depending on how fit they are on what you want that setup to be. And they get a lot of steps where they're driving like lower level coordinated rotation, through that aspect. I've done slide boards for 5 minute blocks in LICT, where we're just doing lateral movement, pushing off, pushing off, pushing off to drive again, adduction, abduction, rotation, whatever. So there's a lot of ways, even through like metabolic conditioning modalities, that you can drive some of these movement competencies way more effectively than probably on that high stem day, where you're going to be more sagittal, you're going to be more bilateral compressive on a lot of those things. Like that's like I said, for me, it's like that's my pin squat, that's my high handle trap bar, that's my bilateral bench press, either banded or on a pin. That's my heavy bilateral pull. I usually do weighted chins for that a lot of times. So that's the only one that's going to be a little longer range of motion. But for some people, if they can tolerate it and they have the training background, like Pinley squats are another option that I'll
Oh
use for
yeah.
that if I'm shorter and more explosive. Um, Getting into myofibril, that's where we get full range of motion. That's where we get into lengthened positions. That's where you can really get into deeper ranges of motion for people, right? Like that's even where if I want to drive like single leg work, like if I want to load up somebody on a single leg RDL or a back lunge, like and do something like a landmine or a hand supported like heavier option, and I can even drive more lateralization of the pelvis to get more glute med in there and full glute max lengthening, full medial hamstring lengthening. Like that's where I'm going to put that, and we're going to load it up, and we're going to do sets of 6 to 8, to pretty high intensity, and getting into the low level, that's where we might just be doing like more seated leg curl, oscillatory, leg extension, oscillatory, even adductor, abductor, side lunges for volume, things like that, walking lunges for volume. Like I said, a lot of the LICT, when I during COVID, I got the 2 20-minute blocks of walking lunges with this body weight, right? And it's just like those will butter your hips up
Yeah.
after a while. Like you get to where like you're getting all the rotation,
Dude,
to a point.
just a sidetrack, sorry, sidetrack, but what you're talking about, I had the owner of the gym that I train out of. He was doing that with weight with vest and shit, just going crazy. And he had some issues, and I was just like with his shoulder, and I'm looking at him, I'm like, man, your hips are amazing. I was like,
Wait, your
fuck,
hips.
from
This is
those fucking lunges you do for fucking 30 minutes at a time.
it was- my neighbors thought I was crazy. I was just doing them in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
driveway.
you are. You're a fucking psycho.
I was just like, this. I had a rower and like two 24 kilo kettlebells and a 44 kilo kettlebell and my body. And and that's so we ended up doing a lot of those, and it was just I do sets of, what I like anti-glyco EMOM, circuits of 5 swings and like 5 plyo push-ups for like 20 rounds of five, one a minute, with my 44 kilo bell. And it was just like that's even where a lot of this stuff too, like even looking back, like that was kind of the start of probably a lot of this type of training because I had very little equipment and I had very little variations that I could do. So I would have kind of divided things up into like high stem days. There's a hill by my house. I do some hill sprints. I do end up doing 100 swings and 100 plyo push-ups by the time I did 20 sets of, five of each of them. I had moderate stem days where I would do more presses, statodynamic stuff, heavier, goblet squats or double rack squats, whatever. And then I had like very oxidative, like super high volume, just low stem stuff where I would do things like a lot of lunge blocks, crawling. I did a ton of as well,
That
uh,
awesome.
which would just smoke my upper body altogether. But again, it's like you look at that, and it's like you ever want to feel a serratus and feel protraction? Let's like have them go crawl for like 5 minutes. Like they will wake up feeling muscles they never knew they even had, and it's just like it'll get them, And I think finding ways outside of the box and it's like looking at positional competency. That's a great way. Crawling is probably a great way to drive expansion,
Oh,
when
yeah.
you look at it, right? So, especially just rib cage stabilization through like alternating reciprocal upper body movements, So it's just did a lot of, bent over alternating rows, a lot of seesaw pressing, things like that for like just general movement competency, rib cage mechanics. Um, and then a lot of rowing and a lot of running. It was just like I got super fit. I wasn't strong at all. Like I definitely lost a lot of just like base, like upper end strength, but I actually looked great and was super fit with it. So
You never did the Murph or anything like Alec?
no, no, I never did.
Yeah, I mean, fuck that. I wouldn't do that either. You guys are psycho. I mean, he's super psycho, but
He's crazier than I am. So he gets to take the cake on that one for sure.
yeah, I have him on next week, like in 2 weeks. So I'm really looking forward to it. I love talking to him. He's super motivating.
He's a good dude. He's a monster.
And I can't believe he's a vegan, but he's also like I love how he's like the worst vegan ever. So it kind of like they want to use him as like their poster child for you can do it. He's like the worst fucking. He's got
Yeah,
to be
it's like,
poster
no,
child
no,
for
no.
hard work trumps everything. I think.
Yeah, yeah.
You
He's like,
know.
if you work hard enough, you can overcome veganism.
Yeah,
Basically,
exactly.
he needs to make that as a t-shirt,
Well,
basically.
when we did our thing, he was like, honestly, I just burned so much that I can just eat so many that I can actually get enough protein. Otherwise, it's like impossible to get protein. I just eat so many calories. So, real quick, just about your kind of programming. One more thing. We touched on this a little bit last time. I think it's a really good topic. Let's say we were working with a bodybuilder, just pack bodybuilder, a little restricted everywhere. Nothing insane, no chronic pain, but we want to increase the movement options as well. They have minor things. What are some ways that potentially we could program in, whether like exercises or thoughts in those different intensity levels that could help this bodybuilder, make some progress while improving their movement variability? Because I know there's alternation and things that you like that I like that could be really good. So I'm just curious, what are some of your thoughts?
And yeah, and a lot of my like accumulation phases, they're not for bodybuilders, but they are more hypertrophy driven, right? And that's where like I will warm people up. Like my first circuit will be very much driven towards like movement competency. So that's where I will like kind of start things off with things like alternating reciprocal rows or presses. Um, Really just to build a little bit of coordination in, extend ranges of motion, and generally warm people up in a way that's not super fatiguing. Maybe build a little bit of occlusion before we get into like the myofibril stuff, just for sensation, right? If I can build in some rotation, some occlusion without a ton of fatiguing, that ends up working really well just from a tissue perspective for a lot of people. So that's where I'll kind of throw that stuff in as a warm up. So we just kind of get it out of the way first. And then from there we get into like kind of myofibral mains and those again, they're going to be extended ranges of motion. Usually I'll pick bilateral selections, but for specific people, especially if I see something that I want to try to overcome or improve upon movement wise, like that's where I will pick unilateral. So again, whether that's what we talked about with an RFE split squat or a FFE split squat, depending on the person, depending on what we want to get out of it, or even just like heavy single arm pulls
Yeah.
and presses, right? Like that's where we can drive some of those mechanics. And especially with pulls, I find it super easy because you can allow for, depending on if it's vertical or horizontal, like you can allow for more rib cage rotation and more protraction, upward rotation to get more lat or to limit that a little bit more and focus on rhomboid, teres, mid trap, whatever. You can kind of again offset a lot of that based on just humeral angle and how much you want the rib cage to actually rotate, through that. So it's like that's where I can throw those in and we can load them up pretty heavy. From a pressing standpoint, same thing. Like if I want to get more posterior expansion and I want to get more protraction, I can pick something that's converging, right? That's going to force those scaps apart just to get the hands converging in the front. So whether that's I mean, machine converging presses kind of are the goats for a lot of that. It's the easiest thing to do. If I've got a good set of just like old school hammer strength press, like that's a great way to drive a heavy stimulus and get a really shortened pick, drive a little bit of protraction, drive a little bit more shoulder flexion on end range, and get the scaps moving a little bit more through the entire range of motion. Drive a little bit more of a lengthened and shortened position on the eccentric and the concentric, respectively. And I can load that up because it's going to be a fixed path for most people. That ends up working really well. And then the accessories, that's where I can drive more actual just like sarcoplasmic work. So again, like if I'm even thinking like a press, like an upper body press day, right? I might have something like an alternating incline as the warm up, load that pretty heavy without it being super fatiguing, more of like a converging like hammer strength press as a main can get upwards of like 4 sets of 8 at a high level of stimulus for that person. And then on the accessories, that's where I can do something like a fly, right? Or a fly variation where I can drive oscillatory, like lengthen to shorten position and really get like a really good pump out of that. Get the scaps moving and get a lot of like humeral rotation through those ranges of motion too. So like I would probably at that point look at low, moderate, low to an extent. One, early on dynamic and then later on probably more fixed and something that's gonna be like super occlusive, kind of to end that range of motion out. If we're looking like lower body, same thing. Like I might start somebody with uh like a seated leg curl and like really again pay attention to like pelvic positioning and work on just getting the hamstrings completely just fired up and then get into like RDLs and then finish out with something that's more like shortened glute, shortened hamstring focus, like a 45-degree hip extension.
Yeah.
Right. And just drive it home at that point, like super oscillatory high volume. So there's definitely, and again, like I tend to not do a ton of variations in a day, but you can superset things into those. You can add more variations, but that's how I tend to look at things where I'm just like, okay, I want something that's either alternating reciprocal or like short positioned early on just to build a little bit of occlusion and sensation. Then I'm going to do all my lengthened, like mechanical tension, myofibril stuff. And then I'm going to come back and probably look at like the other joint action also shortened and more like occlusive based, um, and or like oscillatory based. And that ends up being a pretty good formula for like most of my people. A bodybuilder would probably have to add more to it just for the sheer volume aspect. That would completely just destroy me. You know what I'm saying
Yeah.
like that, right? Where it's like, and that's what a lot of my accumulation phases look like, and they just like they wreck me for the entire rest of the day. So, but I'm also just not used to like training with that type of volume.
Yeah, for most of your clientele, I'm assuming they don't need the variation that like a bodybuilder would. I'm assuming the bodybuilder would spend quite a bit less time at the high stem. Is that how you would if you were
Yeah.
programmed for a bodybuilder?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking with a guy at the gym about that today. It's like, yeah, it's because we were talking about like the like the all the kids doing like the optimal, the
Yeah,
super like it because they always pop up like on my For You page, and I'm just watching these setups, and it's just absolutely insane.
asinine.
Yeah, and it's always, it's always a kid who maybe has a year training age,
They
but
might. A lot of times they have more, but they look like they've only got a year.
yeah, and I'm like that might act like something like that might actually be okay for somebody who's got like 10 years of training and has like the tissue actually built up and they need something hyper specific. Like this kid just needs to sit on a leg press. You know what I'm saying? Like it just like pump out reps and build a ton of volume and actually get some stress. They don't need like the hyper specific, yeah, and things like that. And it's just like, yeah, for a bodybuilder, like if they've been training a long time and they have the tissue and they're really trying to more fine tune the actual movement or fill in gaps from a biomechanics or even just musculature perspective, that's where, yeah, like I would definitely probably take down the main volume or the higher stem volume and add more variability through the actual accessory work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, if I were to just look at it through kind of your programming using my lens, it's like I would think probably a little less with the high stem, just obviously as a bodybuilder, we're already stiff enough, and we're not athletic, really. But I do think there's benefits neurologically. I don't think I think you should touch those. But I would think of like, the mid stem as being like, let's access the earlier phases of propulsion. Let's make sure that our thorax and pelvis can start a little different position. And then, like the reaches. I love reach. I love cables, especially actually. I do a lot of cable presses just because you can get the different scapular positions, and then you can bias the single leg stuff, and then with the low stem, like I could just see that. I think the lift is really good, and that's something that I don't think any bodybuilders fuck with at all is anything like that, and just any kind of reciprocal motion, like you talked about last time on the assault bike, just doing upper body on that too. Like that's great. I really love your move that you do. I do it a lot too. The alternating front pull down. I mean, anything that gets these ribs just alternating is so big on a compressed bodybuilder because they don't fucking move.
Said, oh, I tell everybody too, is like that's also the best oblique exercise
Yeah.
I do. And you load like you can load it up, man. Like it's
Yeah, you
that
can get
all
a huge training stimulus with that. That's not like you're giving up shit. Yeah.
oh no, it's like I use that as like my myofibril main, in some
Yeah.
phases. Like it's my main pull
Yeah.
sometimes. And because I can load it up and it just torches my like that's one of the only things that'll actually leave my back sore.
Yeah. Yeah.
When
That'll
it
get that low lat insertion so good that a lot of people don't connect to. Yeah.
crushes my obliques,
Yeah.
as I did as well. And it's just like it ends up just a lot of birds with one stone,
Yeah.
with one exercise there. And yeah, that's something that could either be, for some people that might be the warm up, kind of primer or accessory just to drive some movement first. And maybe they end up doing like a heavy chest supported, row or T-bar row or whatever for their main. But for other people, like that could be the main lift. Like that
Yeah.
could be something that you can load up and make heavy, and actually like drive more stimulus to that actual like rib cage motion as well. So there's a lot of just versatility in those patterns if you know how to actually load them up and kind of what you're looking to get out of them.
Yeah, and
As
some people like they load them up, like they think they're loading them up, and they turn into like a different kind of movement. You know what I mean? It's like it's still fucking work. Like make like let your body. Like sometimes people go too light on that kind of stuff because they're trying to facilitate a certain thing, and then they can get wonky. Like if you use enough weight to where you can only get 10 reps, like you're gonna usually do it right if you have some sort of movement competency. One of the quotes you gave last time, which was great. I don't know if you remember the context it was. It was competency is where adaptation goes to die. And I thought
yeah.
that was really good. And I was just wondering, like, how do you think about that in terms of your programming, in terms of like the systems that you have like learned? What does that mean to you exactly?
So I mean, it all comes down to like, competency is I mean, and even like complexity, novelty, familiarity, like they're all fluid, right? There's no absolute level of complexity and competency or novelty, right? So anytime we introduce any kind of new training stimulus, it's complex. It's inherently going to be more complex than your level of understanding, and you have to learn it, right? As you learn it, you're able to progress it, you become more familiar with it, you're able to increase the intensity or the volume, whatever, depending on what you're trying to train for. But as you increase, intensity and volume, complexity inherently will decrease due to increased familiarity through that system. So that's where, like, for me, it's like if you're fully competent in what you're doing, that really just means you haven't progressed yourself away from it at that point. And you probably need to if you want to you know, keep creating change, right? Because adaptation doesn't happen within homeostasis, right? It's allostasis, right? It's an allostatic mechanism to new stimulus, new levels of uh, complexity or novelty, exposures to those things, repeated enough that your body has to adapt. And training is again the vehicle for adaptation with that, in the sense that we're talking about, at least, right? So it's like if you're fully competent within a movement system, you're really only fully competent within the level that you've trained it, right? You probably need to find ways of progressive overload, whether it be intensity or volume there, that actually challenges that level of competency. Because you're not just going to keep adapting by doing the same thing over and over and over again with no change once you get really good at it. So it's like I think that for me is like that was a big understanding for me too. It's like if I get to, it's if I go into the gym and my goal is to bench press 135. And I've never trained before. At first, the bar itself is super heavy. I do that for a few weeks and it becomes really easy, right? I've adapted neurologically. I've become more coordinated. I'm able to produce more force. Maybe I put on a little bit of tissue at that point. I move up to 65 pounds, kind of the same thing. It's hard at the beginning. I adapt. It becomes easy. I become competent with that. And then, we keep doing that until I get to 135. At this point, I put on a little bit of tissue and I become more coordinated. I can now express the output necessary to bench 135. Well, if I stay for the next year of only benching 135, am I going to continue to get physiological adaptations with that? No, right? I'm going to stagnate. I'm going to stay the same. I need to keep progressing the load, or I need to progress into a new exercise that challenges my movement or my biomechanics or my level of coordination. I need to do more reps or I need to do heavier reps from a progressive standpoint to gain more tissue, whether I'm looking at building tolerance or building capacity, depends on, which strategy I use. But it's the same thing. It's movement coordination, right? You're talking about, FP, the twirlies, right? At a certain point, they get really good at those twirlies. Are they building more coordination out of that? No, they become coordinated enough to do their exercises. But can they do beyond that? Not without training it, right? Once they add more complexity to that, they go back to being a beginner and they have to go through that progressive learning process all over again, right? To keep adapting, keep progressing that, even that skill. And I think that's where, like, from a training perspective, it's like, should you be changing, your training all the time, every week or every 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Like, no, like you need to like kind of, obviously stay within the same thing for a certain amount of time to get better at it and progress it. But you do have to progress it, right? There isn't a point where you just become fully competent, right? It's just like you're competent at what you've been exposed to, but where people typically have faults or get injured or where risk increases is like it's like you meet, an environmental control that you're not prepared for, right? So you need to keep training, you need to keep working on preparation, because competency only exists to the level at which you're prepared and which you've trained.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why me and a lot of the people I train are so into the stuff that, I do from Bill and like the whole ECM PRI stuff is because, like a lot of us, like I worked out with, I trained this guy down in Houston, my hometown this weekend. He's a fucking monster. He's a monster. He's getting ready for bodybuilding. He was a DT for U of H at 310 pounds, ran a 4.7, just a fucking monster, 6 foot, just strong as
Absolutely.
shit. And
Yeah.
he's already just pushing so much weight. I mean, just load everything's a gym pin. Like there's nothing that's not. He's just known for just his strength. And I went down there and he's obviously super competent at lifting that way. So he's progressive overloading, but it's all from a super late propulsive, super extended kind of position. Obviously as a DT, right? You're fucking doing that for so many years. So like we just made him not competent at the same movements just by changing his shape. And he was just like, what in the fuck? He had to take so much weight down. And he's such an athlete. Athletes are the best to train, right? Because they're so coachable. And he was like so excited. He's like, I didn't know what I was gonna do. What am I supposed to do? Just add more weight forever? He's like, now I can lighten and I can go back and like I can progress again. So it's like you can be really competent at something, and then you just change one little variable, whether it's where your blood pressure is, what is your rib cage doing, and now you can become incompetent and make gains again.
100%. Yeah, it's well, and that's even something where it's like, we worked with a lot of power lifters over the years, and it's the same thing.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like you look at their bench press and everything's super extended. The range is super short, super, it's length in position, maybe to mid range. They don't ever get into short and
Oh
right,
no.
so wide and they're so extended. So it's like all of a sudden you give that person outside of their comp lifts, like you don't stop doing that, but it's like you give them a few accessories where they're going like mid to short range and you're filling a huge amount of gaps for them. And they're not good at it. They're not strong
Mm.
in those
I,
positions.
I have my I have my power lifters do hook line and bench presses too.
Yeah, hook
Fucks
lying,
fucks
close
them up.
grip.
Yeah.
Yeah, we gave that to all of them. We're like,
Yeah.
listen, like I'm gonna put you on a hook line and I'm gonna get you in a close grip and we're gonna go full range of motion and I want you to actually press into more flexion, right? And get your serratus active, through that process. Same thing, like give them a really good like cable fly, right? Where they can actually squeeze and like wrap,
Yeah.
get the scaps actually wrapped around the rib cage and get into like a true adduction, right? It's like all of a sudden, like they're feeling things they've never felt before. Like training does get more challenging because they're accessing ranges of motion they've just never really gone through.
And they're gonna hypertrophy. It's gonna help
Oh,
them.
yeah. It's like they'll make because they have the coordination and the neurological ability to like do those things really quickly. It's the same thing, like give them a single leg movement, like give them a unilateral movement that's a little more narrow outside of like their wider bilateral base because a lot of them go fairly wide again to decrease some of that range of motion. And it's like, yeah, you give them like a front foot elevated, like alternating back lunge where they're going through like full range of motion, even out into like lockout, hip lock at the end range. And it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's what a fully lengthened glute feels like. Like that's crazy. I've never felt those because I'm always adducted and I'm super wide and I'm just going to just parallel in a shortened range of motion. And it's like, yeah, like you're not only building more muscle and building more total strength, but you're also building more joint resiliency and variability throughout that process. Like you're like again, we don't want to talk about like injury prevention from a global standpoint, but there are definitely things you can build robustness with. And I think those are easy ways to kind of go about the process is just using range of motion from a novel perspective and getting people just stronger and deeper, longer ranges of motion, especially someone who's like more compressed like that, is an easy way to get them more robust
Yeah.
without taking away from their goals.
Yeah. You're bigger than the ISOs too. We talked a little bit about some of the different
Yeah.
ways to include it. And I think you're like hanging out at the in ranges for the compressed,
Yeah.
super good. And then like I said, hanging out in the more like force producing areas for someone who maybe is
Like,
overexpanded or
yeah, something
yeah.
like
I like just holding a 90-90 split squat, for like a narrow is just fucking like torture. Whereas like a wide, maybe I want them to get that big, hip extension and get down and maybe do some tier stuff from there. So I figured I'll let you choose where we want to take this before I let you go. Let's cover because we kind of touched a little bit of both of these, and I think they're both really valuable. And whichever one you want to go with, we'll go with. So we can talk about the narrows, the fucking lava lamps and the floaty,
the,
or
the
we could talk about some help for trainers, some of our thoughts that could help the potential new coaches with. Where do you want to go?
honestly, I think we talked about narrows quite a bit in the last one. Like, I'd rather talk about new trainers and helping
Yeah.
them get started and build. I think more so than anything else. We touched on this a little bit at the beginning of the call, but it's such a different world than probably either one of it.
Oh
Definitely when
yeah.
I started, but probably yourself as
Yeah. I,
well.
I started in '04.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, not
I'm sorry.
even.
I'm sorry. Oh six. I just gave myself, I aged myself. Oh six.
Yeah, which is about what I was right around the same time. I graduated college in '06 and started in '07, in the industry. And it's man, it is the pre-social media age. I mean, pre-smartphone, right? Like, we joked about this, I think, last time. It's like, I mean, I was out there with a Nokia brick,
Yep.
when I first started, and eventually got a flip phone and like a BlackBerry, and then finally the iPhones came out in my third or fourth year of training. And it's just like social media wasn't a thing. There was no way to advertise yourself and market yourself. There's no way to really make money in training outside of actually training people in person in a gym. Even in New York, there were no independent training gyms. Everybody worked at box gyms because nobody could market themselves. Like trainers were taking out like billboards on the side of bus stops, like if they wanted to like work independently. So there was like a few, maybe a handful of trainers in New York that were well known enough and had a big enough like network that they could train independently outside of a gym. But like everybody else, like you were at Crunch or Equinox or New York Sports Club or wherever, and you had that population of the actual membership base. And that's what you built your business out of. Like I there was no way to go about it. Remote coaching was not a thing.
Did you ever do
Now,
door to door? I mean, I went door to door. Like
oh,
I put
we went
flyers,
every
free
neighborhood.
free workouts at the parks.
We took cards to the coffee shops and the bodegas and anywhere close to us. Like you carried cards everywhere you
Oh
went.
yeah.
And you put, yeah, flyers, everything, and it's like I mean, you just, like you said, you did so many free things. Like you did anything you could to get people in front of you. Like I said earlier, like I never turned down a consultation unless I just was so booked up I couldn't fit it in. I would move people around. If
Yeah, I would
like,
move my clients, but like, I got to get this new client. They would try to
yeah.
help you. I'm like, sorry.
Oh yeah, it's like they were all for it. They were like,
Yeah.
sure, like whatever, like I'll do what I can. Because they knew, it's like they saw how hard you were working to like make it happen. And it's like I would watch trainers turn things down. I would watch them not come in on the weekends or not come in on the evenings or
Well, and
immediately.
one thing you mentioned too is like how the managers started to see that and they started to feed you people. I mean, that was what I
Oh
always
yeah,
told people. I was like, you guys need me to live, so you need to like be team players and like,
yeah.
obviously I want to give the client to someone who's going to re-sign them and be good for them, but I'm going to like skew that towards someone who's like a team guy and helps us out, and like does their spot.
Well, that was my thing in management too. Like I used to always tell the trainers because I used to, like, I took care of my high producing
Oh yeah,
coaches,
for
and,
sure.
and the new coaches that weren't doing as well would get mad at me. They'd be like, this guy's already got a full book. Like, why are you giving a client? I was like, and I tell them, like, listen, like for me, this is the stock market,
Exactly.
right? I can invest money into a high yield stock, or I can invest money into a low yield stock. Which one am I going to do? Like the that high producing coach I give that client to, they're gonna sign them at their rate and they're gonna probably keep them for years and years and years, like they have the rest of their clients. Like you turn down consultations, don't sign consultations, churn through turnover and 10 packs that never resign and whatever, like you're not a high producing stock. You're not somebody that I'm going to invest in because I've also got kind of a duty to the
Fine.
client to give them the best possible coach, right? So it's like that's my consumer, like not you, not the trainer who comes in at 8 o'clock and leaves at 4 and is trying to fill up this dream schedule that where you never have to work mornings or evenings. Like you're not the one that I'm really trying to help. Like you at that point, like you gotta do some of the dirty work and you gotta prove yourself,
And I
that you
and
can.
I assume you were like me in the sense that if someone wanted the time, you would give it to them because that's only going to make them better. And so it's like if you're not putting in the time, like I'm not going to waste my time.
100%. It's like I can only help you as much as you're willing to help yourself, right? And that was something that like my initial manager was really good about. It's like, and like I said, it's like I never turned down people. I would take him at all times a day, and he like learned that. And he's like, hey, like he'd give me people, and like if he had people who like bought packages at pre-sale or whatever at membership, like a 5 pack or a 10 pack or a promo package or whatever, I started renewing people, and he'd start giving me those people. because he knew I was going to retain them and he knew I was going to keep them in the system. And it's just like if you can prove yourself through first, like taking advantage of opportunities, but second, like retain your clients. Like that's the easiest way to make money in this business is retaining your clients. Like it's the majority of my people I had for 5, 6, 7 years of training. Like there were people that started with me in my first year, and I still had them 4 to 5 years later,
Yeah.
training 2 times a
I
week.
mean, most of mine are 10, yeah, right
Yeah.
now.
It's just like well, that's where like my remote clients now, like a lot of them are 4, 5, 6 years into it, and it's just resell those people, like retain those people. Like again, people are gonna move, people are gonna, whatever. There's a lot of things that can get in the way, but if you can retain 75 to 80% of your clients, you will have a good business. You'll also have a referral network that actively tries to help you.
And it's way different than taking the new assessment who's walking in the gym when
Yeah.
you've been training someone for 2 years and they've been talking to the friend about you for 2 years and then they finally decide to come in. That's 100%, you know?
And that's an educated consumer, right? It's like at that point, it's like they've heard about you and they're in the same socioeconomic
Yeah,
bracket.
exactly.
If your client can afford your pricing, their friends probably can too. They also have an idea of what the pricing is if they don't know exactly what the pricing is before they come in. So you don't have to have that awkward conversation where you're like,
Yeah.
this much, and you just watch their face drop because they thought it was half of that, or whatever. Like they come in educated, they know what the situation is. They really just need to see if it's a personality fit
Yeah.
at that more often than not. And that's an easy sell, and that's what sales actually is. It's not convincing somebody who doesn't want to do something to do something. It's finding the people who already want to do it and just maximizing on it.
Yeah.
And you can build up enough of a reputation and you can like with the people that you work with, retention and referrals are the name of the game. And early on, it's building a reputation with your manager and the people in charge by taking advantage of opportunities that other people won't. It's like it's the same thing that always my coaches in sports always said, like somebody's always willing to do the things you're not. That's life. Like there's somebody always
Gotta tell
waiting.
my wife that, my girl that. I was joking.
Yeah, it's like that's just what it is, and it's the same thing. Like if you're, I was a trainer on a staff of 45. And I was willing to take the you 5 o'clock consultation, give it to me. I'll do it. They no showed, I'll find a way to get them in later. Like 10 p.m., I'll do it. Saturday morning, Sunday afternoon, I'll do it. I'll find a way to do it and I'll get them in during the week. If I got a client there, I'll see if I can move them. Most of my clients are pretty flexible. If
They
not,
want you to be successful in this industry so bad.
so it's and it's just one of those things. It's like even if you can't fit it into your schedule right then, take it anyway. You'll find a way to get it in. If somebody can do 5 o'clock PM on a Monday, they can probably do it on a Tuesday or a Wednesday too. Like you'll find a way to get that person in that week. And I think that's where, a lot of coaches is just like they all have this dream that they can kind of start their business and they know a coach who's making 6 figures who only works from 7 to 2. And they're like, oh, that sounds great. I'm going to do that. It's like, no, that's not where that person
They missed the
started.
grind part.
Yeah, you missed the 3 years before that, where they actually, built up the business where they could do that schedule, and they want to jump to that position. It's like, no, you got to eat shit. Like
Dude,
that's part of what this business is early on, and that's why the turnover is so high because people aren't willing to do that.
you know what fucked us at one of our gyms? It was such a stupid model. They switched it, but at my West Hollywood gym was our busiest gym. We had our in-house trainers and we had fucking independent trainers. So we have these in-house trainers just riding their fucking bikes in their shitty cars, driving it. Then you have these fucking like Rich Piana was one of our independent trainers. You have these
Yeah.
independent trainers who are like driving Porsches and stuff. So
It's like in Lambo,
yeah,
and you're
all of our trainers like, oh, that could be me, and they all quit, and then they end up getting out of the industry. But I was like, that's such a fucking terrible business model. But like nowadays, I mean, things have changed, right? Like even the perceived value of training, right? Like when we first started, there was no perceived value. It was kind of like you're going to show me how to use the machines, essentially.
oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
like nowadays, I feel like people are a little bit more aware as consumers, but it's like it's not the same. Like you don't really go to like a 24 and pick up your clients and start there as much anymore. There's a little bit of that, but it seems to me, and tell me what your thoughts are. If I was a new trainer, I'm probably either gonna go to the big Equinox or Lifetime where they have high value clients and stay there for a couple years, build up some reputation, and eventually go out on my own, or I'm gonna do what I've had people do with me when I had my gym is I'm going to reach out to an independent gym owner and see if there's anything I can do. Can I shadow? Can I follow? Can I learn? Can I do anything to get in there and maybe go through that route? So I don't know. What are your thoughts? If you were a new trainer now, like how do you think you would approach it?
I think, I mean, honestly, either one of those pathways I think works. And obviously, like even within like we don't have equinoxes in St. Louis. We have two lifetimes. And those are definitely the trainers that are in a in a gym system that are making the most money. Like the people there that are have busy schedules, the clientele there is definitely a higher level clientele than just about anywhere else. They can build a really good business. They're still getting, I mean, they're getting 50% of their paycheck taken for sure, but they're probably also getting more referrals right off the bat. So they're getting more of a constant flow or steady flow of new leads to kind of make up for that. Again, I mean, that's for that type of convenience and that type of referral network, your sacrifice is you're giving up 40 to 50 to sometimes 60% of the price off a session, right? You're the house is taking that back, so to speak. And I think that's for a lot of those people, like that's a great way to like build an initial business. There are definitely some coaches who stay in that system forever. Like I know 45-year-old coaches at Lifetime that make good money, not great money, but really good money and live super comfortably. And I mean, it's a pretty stress-free life. Like they're perfectly happy doing that, and that's what they want out of it, and they're getting it. And then I know coaches who, they do that for 2 or 3 years and then they take that private. They find a personal training studio or they find a gym that allows for contractors and they bring their clientele over and maybe they move 60% of those people, but now instead of making 50% a session, they're making 100% a session, paying a small rental fee or whatever, and they're making more money in half the hours. And that's also a good setup, based on that. You would go from training 40 sessions a week and making X amount to training 25 sessions a week and making more. That's a good trade. That's a trade that I'll take just about any time. Like our gym right now, we have independent coaches. Right now, we have five, and they all came to us with pretty established books of business. Brought their clients in, their clients pay a membership. The trainers pay us a monthly rental fee, and they charge their clients whatever they want to charge their clients. And that works out really well. They're established. We have some younger coaches that have tried to kind of get into it, and we've honestly told them it's like, hey, like you're probably better off establishing your business somewhere else because our gym doesn't have a huge membership base. We're still so new. A lot of the people that the majority of our gym membership even is probably more in the intermediate to advanced stage. They're not necessarily looking for coaches or they already have coaches.
Yeah.
And they're not kind of your typical gym pop client that's, walking into Lifetime saying, like I'm coming from the country club and I golf 4 days a week and I want to be able to, lower my score or whatever, and my back kind of hurts and I'm going to train 3 days a week. Like put me with somebody. It is what it is. So we might not be the place for that person. We do have two interns right now. And the goal with them is in 3 months, we get them to where they're teaching, small group or semi-private or coaching sessions, at the gym. So that is something that like as we get them built up, we're going to be promoting more for, we're going to be marketing more for as a gym with new clientele to try to get them built up a little bit, within the system as they're taking the time to kind of learn our systems and become familiar with them. So we'll see how it works. Again, for right now, it might not. Like I honestly don't know in 3 months if we'll have enough of a base where we can feed them clients. Like we have enough actual potential clients for them. Because right now, the majority of our gym members, like they're not looking for training,
Yeah.
and I think that's where you also need to know what your location is, what your environment is, what your demographic is, and make sure you're lined up correctly. Because, if you're looking for people who probably need training more and want to train or looking to train, have the financial currency to train and the flexibility to train, like something like an Equinox or a Lifetime is probably a great place to start. And really, all you have to do when you get there is outwork everybody. Outwork all the new people. Like talk to the established people, see what they're doing, And then you're going to come in with a hiring class typically each month. Most of those gyms bring in like 3 to 6 people depending on their staffs and outwork everybody you came in with and then keep working.
Yeah.
Impress the manager early on.
We just throw everything at the wall. Like the new trainers would see who sticks. Usually we'd get like one or two per month, maybe that would hang around. You
We
know.
used to like when I was managing in New York, our turnover rate was 170%.
What does that even mean? How does that you had
We lost more people than we brought on.
I got you. That's
Yeah.
funny.
It's like I remember so I was the manager of the year for 2 years and I got the turnover rate down to 125%. And they like threw me a parade.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, because but that's really like if you had a cert, they would hire you and onboard you.
We would hire you without a cert. We would give you
Yeah.
your cert and then fucking take it out of your
See
paycheck.
if you make it, right? And like you said, I mean, maybe 10% stick. That we used to call it the first 90 days. Like if you can get through the first 90 days, you're probably okay. But that first 90 days, like that's the chopping block. You got to build a business. You got to be able to become like financially dependent, independent at that point. And that's where a lot of, you see it in the first week. Like you see coaches that are like all of a sudden they're strolling in at like 9 a.m. It's like, oh, you got no
See ya.
not and
Yeah.
you're probably working only evenings and all evening, like you got no chance. So
Yeah.
they got coaches
Taking the
leave.
nurse night shift or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
coaches leaving at 4 o'clock and they're not really trying hard in the morning. It's like you see the work ethic right away.
I've seen so many trainers get discouraged and quit, but a lot of those ones that I saw, I don't know if they would have had it necessarily to make it. But it's like if you see somebody else, this is what I used to tell my trainers when I like because I was, like you, I set all the records, I was the director, I was the goal, and I'm like, there's nothing spectacular about me. I don't have some different brain or some crazy thing that I do that you can't do, like your own style of like there's like if someone else can do it, you can fucking do it, you know?
Oh yeah, especially early on. Like I wasn't the best trainer in the building. You know what I'm saying? Like I didn't know anything,
Yeah.
coming into it. But I took every opportunity,
Yeah.
again, I think I was able to relate and talk to people, which was probably the best skill that I had early on. It wasn't programming or biomechanics. It was I could sit there and listen to people talk and have a real conversation with them, and I think that just being relatable and being personable went a super long way and knowing enough so that they started seeing progress pretty early on. And I think, the lowest hanging fruit I learned really early was obviously things that were like more competency or like neurologically based, like coordination based, where it's like, they're not going to put on 10 pounds of muscle in their first month of training or that initial 10 pack they bought. But can you improve their skill enough to where like the exercises they struggled with in those initial couple sessions, they're now doing really well, like 2 to 3 weeks later? Because that shows that there's progress being made. Right. And that's what I used to tell a lot of clients is like, yeah, the first thing we do is like, you've got to learn how to do these things. At that point, like competency wasn't in my vocabulary. It's like you kind of have to master the movement itself. And then we start loading the movement more and we start building more volume. And that's where you start building more muscle and, more output and whatever. And, I think even explaining that process, things that, we think are super fundamental and probably don't need like obvious in a lot of ways. Like your clients don't know that.
Yeah.
Like like I think we overestimate a lot of the times what the general population knows and even the ones that like follow social media accounts, a lot of times like they don't understand the underlying principles of what the coach is talking about. They're just looking at the dude with his shirt off looking good. They're like he's doing this exercise, I want to do that. And it's like okay, like cool, but do you actually understand what's happening, what they're trying to accomplish with it?
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
I think that, just some general advice for trainers too is like you gotta, if this is what you want to do, like fucking commit to it. Like you move, you changed your whole life to it. I moved out here to Newport Beach to do this. It's like if I think about my journey, like I was at, I was in a really shitty like area, like low income area, and I left, brought all my clients. And I was doing independent there. I was like, I got to get to where there's more money. And so like I kept my clients there and I started a little independent gym here in Newport Beach to stay there for a few years and then eventually just in it with the higher income people because you get to certain areas and it's like it starts becoming a luxury and it becomes just something they have. It's a necessity. Like and it doesn't, depending on where you're at, like where I was before, like we were very, at the whim of the financial markets and stuff, right? Because
Oh yeah.
shit starts going bad, they'll cut trainers first in a low income area, but you go somewhere else, it's like that doesn't even like necessarily register on their. It's like not even something they'll cut something else out before that. They won't cut that out. Like they some of it is also keeping up with the Joneses. It's like, oh well, my neighbor Shirley has a trainer 3 times a week, so I gotta do that. So I think that like, and then I had a guy move out from Rochester to work at my gym. He fucking made that. So I think like if this is what you want to do, you got to go to where you feel like you'll be successful, and don't be afraid to fucking make that jump. You know.
One, I think also like to go along with that, like don't give yourself an out. As soon as I
Hmm.
had a trainer that like picked up, bartending or like waitressing or something like that, or in New York it was a lot of like part-time models, right? And it's like, oh, you're doing more castings
Yeah.
now. It's like you're not gonna make it. Like as soon as you like training, building a training business is hard. If you give yourself any other option, it's gonna be the first thing to go.
Dude,
Because
that
it's way easier to pick up shifts or go to more castings
especially if
or
this isn't your 100% like thing right. So I used to when I was in West Hollywood, that was my every interview I did, I would try to subtly find out, are you trying to be a fucking actor or is that what you're
yeah,
here for? Because if
yeah,
you are, I don't fucking want you in my gym.
for us it was models and sometimes actors, but it's the same thing. It's like, oh, you're a good looking person who's like somewhat in shape and you think you can train people. And some of them, again, they'd come in certified or whatever. But it's just like, yeah, like this isn't what you want to do. You're just trying to make some supplemental income and you can't really half step this. Like you can't be 1 foot in, 1 foot out and be successful, especially early on. Like maybe when you're super established, if you want to branch into some other things, you can do that. But yeah, it's like we used to always joke. It's like, yeah, a trainer would start, and they'd be 2, 3 weeks in, they'd have no clients, they haven't done any consults, they're just kind of standing around taking up space, and all of a sudden they're picking up bartending shifts. And you're like, they're a week away from being gone.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna get that text or get that email. I didn't even have to fire him. Like I already
Yep.
knew it was coming. Like, hey, sorry. Like, and I'm like, hey, no worries. It's like do what you got to do. But I used to always show that to like new coaches. It's like they never put everything into it because they didn't have to. They made a backup plan before they started. It's like you said, I moved to New York. It's like I'm good at this, or I'm moving back home. No, like with
Same
no
here.
money. Like there's no other option. Like I'm gonna go work on the farm. Like if I can't do this, like this is what I'm doing. So it's like I wasn't gonna, pick up other jobs in New York. I didn't have an education or the skill to do anything else. Like I wasn't gonna find something else that wasn't like just an hourly sales job somewhere. So it's like I had to find a way to make money being a trainer.
And
And there's
as
a level of desperation there.
Yeah, and like as a man, I think that is such a valuable like thing to know in the back of your head that like I can be self-sufficient. I can make shit happen when I have no other option. So it's like if you can do that then like okay, you build that confidence. Like I've done that so many times now. I don't even get like anxious about it. It's like, oh, here's another fun chance to restart and do this shit. But
Yeah, it's like
if you've
I've
never done
hustled
that,
before. Yeah, I've hustled before. I've done it before. I can do it again. And it's yeah, there's a level of self-assurance that experience brings you where it's like, oh yeah, I had my back against the wall and I dug deep and I figured it out and I made it happen. And it's like, but if you've never done that and you never give yourself the opportunity to do that, it's like you're gonna find other ways out.
yeah.
Ever.
And dude, worst case, it fucking fails. You're gonna learn some shit from that. You know what I mean? And so it's like there's really no reason not to. So before I let you go, maybe we could talk real quick just about like what do you think as far as education for trainers? If you were a new trainer, how would you recommend them getting their knowledge? Just starting.
Yeah, so
Obviously,
we
some of this depends on the trainer themselves, but yeah.
yeah, and this is where, I don't want to backtalk it because I talked about, earlier on in the call, like not having all these opportunities. And, I never want to like kind of explain that as a bad thing because it is a good thing. And, now I think with coaches, I think the certification process is such a business now, right? Where it's such a racket. Like, I think, we tell a lot of coaches, like, get your initial certification so that you're legal and you can get a job.
Doesn't really
And
matter which one, in my
it
opinion.
doesn't
Yeah.
really matter which one. Whatever gym you want to go to, like, see which ones they prefer for sure. And they'll tell you NASM or they'll tell you NSCA or uh, NCA, yeah, whatever. ISSA, whatever, and they'll give you one. They might just say, "Hey, honestly, get the cheapest one. Don't care. We're gonna provide you in-house education, or these are the courses that we want you to do after that." But get your cert, get legal, and then I think honestly, it's like look at what your population is, look at where your areas of opportunity are, like make sure that the education that you're seeking out matches the needs of those people. And I think there's so many now courses and seminars and intensive groups and things like that. Like, you know, if I'm a coach today, it's like I'm gonna get my cert and I'm gonna jump into like I might not necessarily go straight into like PRI courses. I might look at something like an Alex Effer course or something like that, where it's like, okay, I can get some of the fundamentals here and I can maybe learn some new applications. And I can do that with something that's probably going to be drawn out over 10 to 12 weeks instead of 3 days. And I can get more exposures and maybe more training time. There's ways that, especially as a new coach, like I don't have $1,500 to go do a seminar somewhere, but can I take this $300 online course like that's teaching similar things and probably in a more practical manner in a lot of ways? Because that's where, even like the initial course that we did, that we started back before COVID, we did 14 cohorts of that. And a lot of it was just like we tried to think about as a new coach, it's like, what do they need to know from a biomechanics perspective, from a business perspective? What do they need to know just to be successful from day one through day, 365? And kind of built the course out of that. And now it's just like there's so many of those where they've taken all these certifications and they distilled the information down into these are the things that you actually probably need that are more applicable. And I would look at a lot of those courses because I could take 3 or 4 of those sometimes for the price that it cost me to take one in-person 3-day course or seminar with some of these other certifying bodies. So it's like that might be part of it where it's like if I'm in a Gen Pop setting, find some biomechanics courses, find things that kind of apply to movement competencies or compensations that I would see with a population that's probably like sitting at a desk all day and super overstressed. Okay, like these are the courses that I might need for that. If I'm working in more an athletic population where I'm looking at athletes or even like I've got a guy right now that I'm taking through a mentorship program where he got his first job, like he's super lucky, but he basically stumbled into being like the only trainer at a country club. I'm just like, dude, that's a gold mine, one. And he's like, yeah, but I don't know anything. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, obviously you've got a bunch of like, I mean, corporate athletes basically that do a whole lot of golf, tennis, and now pickleball, right? So it's like, okay, figure out about those sports,
Yeah,
figure
just
out
get that titleist cert just for the name, even though it doesn't do
yeah,
that good.
get a couple certifications that relate to those
Uh,
things and start working with them. Again, a lot of them don't actually need that much specialized stuff. If they just move better globally, that will carry over into the specifics of whatever they're trying to do from a
yeah.
performance perspective as well. But it's like find things that actually match up with the needs of the people that you work with. And then, again, I don't want to say avoid like the major certifying bodies and the things they're doing, but just understand that a lot of those things are really overpriced and even sometimes predatory. I think on younger coaches that feel like they have to do it or they have to stick to those things where just because of the CEU process, where now there's a lot of independent providers. I even think about like Shallow's work, right? Where it's just like they do great courses like with the prescript stuff like that like I'd rather have somebody go through that process than like the PES and the CES,
Yes, for
right?
sure.
And the price isn't that much different.
Uh,
Like there's not that much difference in pricing, so it's just like finding some of these like independent providers that put out really good information but they're not necessarily part of that kind of old network. I think you're going to get better information. You're probably going to get more current information as well because a lot of the stuff in you look. Dude, if you look at the CSCS handbook now and like actually study it, the amount of things that you would view as instantly antiquated, I mean, it's probably 60 to 70% of the book where you're like, I can't believe they're still teaching this. Like, this is actually kind of crazy, right? It's just, I think that's where you can probably find more relevant information now with out of network coaches that are offering their own courses. And I think a lot of it's going to be more applicable in a lot of ways. And 10 years ago, I never would have said that.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the industry, that's where I think social media and the ability for some of these coaches to build a business and promote themselves and reach a wider audience, I think actually benefits a lot of the young coaches. Again, that sometimes goes too far where some of these, again, I don't want to say kids, but we'll call them younger coaches have a completely like YouTube education.
Yeah, so they'll get information from somebody who's never had a person in front of them sometimes too.
Yeah. So it's like you have to pick and choose. You have to make sure that, the information and the source of your information also has the experience, that's necessitated by, what they're offering and the price they're offering it at. But you can get CEUs, you can get good, valuable information, and you can even a lot of them, again, it's like you can build a really good network with other coaches. Like you can be on a Discord with 500 other coaches that have been through the system. They're all talking about their experiences every single day. That you can get a lot of practical knowledge from not just the actual course provider, but the other coaches in that system. I've had within our group alone, like we've had 50 to 60 coaches get hired by gym owners that have taken our courses that have just been in the same Discord or Slacks.
Yeah.
Like because they're like, oh, well, like I've been through a course with you. I know you're at least you made it here somehow. You have something in common. Like you stumbled into this course. And then they get to talking, build a rapport, and all of a sudden it's like we got a coach moving to a new city to work in this gym that he never even knew existed 6 months ago.
Right.
And it's just like that's a crazy thing to see coming from like where I came and where you came in
Yeah.
2006 and 7. Like I never thought that would be possible at all. So I think that's probably what I would say to a lot of coaches is like don't feel like you're stuck with the basic acronyms, and it's the same thing with PRI. Like the amount of people that I talk to that it's like, I mean, I see not necessarily like friends of mine, but I'll see coaches I know, and it's like they're taking I for like the fifth time. It's like
You can apply that.
yeah, they're like, it's my fourth time in cervical. It's like, dude, take a new course, like
Right.
branch out of that system, like learn something new. You've probably, you've
You should probably
squeezed that,
outsource at that point if you're looking at that shit, you know?
you squeezed that orange probably enough at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Like find a new acronym, find something else, where it's just like I think you can find really good relevant information from so many places that I think you just need to keep an open mind and not be stuck with some of these more traditional models because there's a lot of really good coaches out there that have distilled a lot of experience and information into cohorts and intensives and seminars. I mean, even something like Bill's, obviously that's more selective, like you have to be like chosen into that, but again, it's like you got Alex Effer, you've got Connor Harris, you've got Katie Cisneros,
David.
you got David, there's so many good Lee's got a course now. Like there's so many great courses out there that it's like you can get a lot of really practical information where a lot of like they've cut a lot of the fat out of kind of some of the things that maybe again stuff that's good, but is it useful? And they found ways to show like better application for actual coaches and not just like practitioners, in a lot of ways. And I think those are, and not only that, but you're also getting a network of usually hundreds, if not thousands of other coaches within that you can also take advantage to kind of whatever level you want. Again, like we've all been on those, like we have our own discords, we have our own slacks, and it's like 20% of the people in the entire group might actually talk and engage in those. The rest of them are just kind of ghosting it. But we always say that you get it, you get out of it what you put into it. If you're asking questions, if you're communicating with people, if you're talking to people, you're gonna get more and more opportunities, and you're gonna get more and more information with that. If you're just kind of lurking on the back ends of those chats and uh I don't even know what to call them. Geez, lost the word, but on the back of those groups, like you're not going to get the information you need, and you're not going to be able to leverage that. But if you're active and engaged, you never. It could be just you get more information out of it. You might get a job offer out of it. Who knows? There's a lot that can come out of those types of things.
And so your course, your thing, you say you're often you do like twice a year now with what you do?
Yeah, 2 to 3 times, probably twice.
So it's live?
Yeah, so we do 10 weeks. We do a live call each week, and then we've got modules to kind of go along with it. And then we've got a Discord where people can ask more questions. We can have more relevant conversations about kind of the things we look at, but it's all programming. We've got some pre-work that kind of branches into like biomechanics and programming theory and physics and some things like that, but we don't actively go into any of that in the course. It's built for people who are kind of, they've already taken several of those courses and have a pretty firm grasp of movement.
Yeah.
We jump straight into really just assessment and figuring out, understanding task demands, building out assessment protocols specific to the person in front of you and what they're trying to do, building out testing blocks, making sure that you're actually getting relevant information, you're able to show progress early on, you get real data, real numbers, and then building out like actual programming after that. And that's kind of where we like to take ours, where it's more practical
Yeah.
rather than just talking about just movement or just ESD or bioenergetics or whatever. It's more so like this is how we lay it out. Um, this is what it looks like.
Nice. Yeah, well, dude, yeah, I think you're a great resource for new trainers. Obviously, I think definitely check it out. I think that it's going to be interesting to see how it continues to evolve, right? Because lines are blurring, trainers are kind of becoming therapists to a certain degree, athletic trainers. So it's like now's the time, you know? Like you guys have so much opportunity that we didn't have, so take advantage of it. Is there anything else you want to put out there before I let you go, brother?
I mean, that's between the two of them. That's probably about all I got right now. If you're in St. Louis, stop by the gym. Check it.
Definitely. Awesome. If you're ever out in Cali, let me know. You bring the family out to
Oh,
Disneyland.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
definitely. So yeah, everybody check it out. Compound Performance is the course.
Yeah, that's where the actual education course is, and we talk about that like on my social media, which is just compound performance underscore.
Okay,
So
cool. And the Gyms Coalition.
coalition, yep,
Nice. Awesome.
coalition.
Thank you so much for redoing this. Like I said before, if you guys are members or if you join over there, we touched on a lot of the same stuff, but we did go into a little more narrows. We broke it down some of the acronyms a little bit more. We went into some of the certifications and stuff. So good stuff over there. But this is great. Thank you so much for doing this again.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on again.
Of course. I appreciate it, brother.
Bye.
Peace.